ADHDers aren't procrastinators of tasks, we're procrastinators of feelings first. And it is perfectly normal to not want to feel like you suck, like you're a failure. What's up, ADHDers, friends and fam? Welcome to episode 3. Thank you so much for joining me on the journey so far. Today, we are going to talk about something that has a deep, paralyzing impact on the ADHD mind. It's something that comes from years and years of struggling and suffering and falling short and being criticized. And that thing is called shame. Shame is that little old devil, that inner critic that is very loud and takes up a lot of space in the ADHD mind and ultimately stops us from making progress and moving forward and challenging ourselves on things that are difficult for us or that cause this feeling of shame and disappointment. So today what we're gonna do is really think about shame and the role that it plays in paralyzing the ADHDer from becoming an ADHDer. We have these inner voices that are borderline abusive within us as a result of all of the times we have felt like we have failed ourselves or have failed others. And if we don't deal with that inner voice, that criticism, that shame, if we don't name it and acknowledge it and bring it to the forefront for the prevalent role, it's not a supporting actor, it's a main character that plays an extremely prevalent role in our paralysis as ADHDers, limiting us in our ability to find systems that work for ourselves and to succeed in a neurotypical world. Because our mind is so crowded with thoughts of inadequacy, with thoughts of failure, with doubts. Now, of course, this is a human condition. We all deal with imposter syndrome. We all deal with doubts. We all deal with anxiety. We all deal with fear of failure. But the ADHD brain deals with it on a hyper-present, hyperactive level that never stops turning. We are traumatized by our condition and the impact that it's had on our lives. And so while for some people, doing a task like cleaning the house or the laundry or a personal hygiene routine, a work-related task, might be something they procrastinate because, it's not engaging or it's boring or you would rather do something else. For us, it's a little bit more complicated and a little more deep than that. Because it's not just the task we're avoiding, it's the feeling that we're avoiding, the feeling associated with the task. Because it's been so difficult for us to accomplish that task. And we have these feelings of, it shouldn't be this hard. Other people do it easier. I was just at my friend's house the other day and it was spotless. Her house is always clean. My house is always a mess. Or you're finally getting that task done. You're finally cleaning the house. You're finally doing those dishes. But instead of being happy that you're doing them and pausing to reward yourself and pat yourself on the back, you're stopping yourself from doing that, being like, you don't deserve a pat on the back. Everybody can do their dishes. You didn't do them for like 2 weeks. Yeah, good thing you did your dishes. Or, girl, you're in your 30s. Weren't you doing your dishes when you were 5? Most toddlers can do that. Even if I have the most efficient, most practical system in the world for cleaning my house and doing my dishes, if I'm being interrupted with all of those negative thoughts and those critiques and that abusive voice from within, it's gonna take me a hell of a lot longer to get through that task because I can't focus. I'm too busy hating myself even though I should be loving myself for getting to it, for putting on that music, for doing the dishes. I'm gonna ask you in this video to do two things. The first is to identify those tasks that you are super avoidant with and really ask yourself, what emotions come up with regard to doing that task that are unpleasant or self-critical? Then I want you to ask yourself, am I avoiding doing the task, or am I avoiding feeling those negative and self-critical emotions? Because if you can identify the feelings that you're trying to avoid rather than the task that you're trying to avoid, you can then find solutions for how to quiet that inner critic, silence those voices, or replace those voices with something a little more positive and a little more productive that rewards you for getting there. We're gonna talk about what I call externalizing the inner critic. Removing her or him from yourself and placing him or her on the face of somebody that loves you or that's supposed to love you and that you love. And we're gonna talk about how important it is to set boundaries with your inner critic in the same way that you would set boundaries with an outer critic, a boyfriend or a parent or somebody who was saying the same negative, mean things that you say to yourself on a daily, minutely basis sometimes as an ADHDer. So the first step is we're gonna notice what are the feelings that we are associating with the task that we are avoiding. The second thing we're going to do is think about how it would feel if those negative feelings and thoughts that we're having about ourselves and our ability to do that task or not do that task were being said to us by someone who's supposed to love us. We're gonna ask ourselves if we would accept that same criticism, that same shame, that same negative emotion from someone who's supposed to love us. And if the answer is that we wouldn't, we're going to ask ourselves why we allow ourselves to talk to ourselves that way. And all of this is with the goal of ultimately neutralizing that task to just be a task, to not be a silent, heavy, emotional burden or emotional load attached to the task. To separate ourselves, to separate the task that we need to do from who we are and from our sense of deserving. It's not a moral failing that you have a pile of dishes in the sink. They just need to be done. And what's stopping you from doing them, more than just your neurobiological ADHD brain, is the rapid, quick-fire succession of negative thoughts and criticisms that you're having about yourself because the dishes piled up. If you can deal with that, you can do anything. It took me years to realize just how much shame played into the way that I was operating in the world, and actually further paralyzed me and disabled me from being able to action against the things that deep down I knew I could probably do, but had only ever seen evidence that I couldn't or that I struggled. What's worse is as I got older and people around me that I saw used to struggle with the same things that I struggled with seemed to find their habits and their routines and their solutions to those problems or grow out of those problems. And for me, I was aging into my mid-20s, into my late 20s, into my early 30s, and still struggling to keep my apartment clean or struggling to feed myself and give myself a routine around food, struggling to go to bed on time and wake up in the morning, struggling to keep a job consistently, struggling in my personal relationships with impulse control and emotional regulation. And all of these signals that I was receiving from both the outside and the inside telling me, Corinne, you are not enough. You're not good enough. And of course, the you're not good enough language doesn't just stop at you're not good enough. It spirals into all of these other thoughts about what you're not good enough for. For example, I've referred to cleaning my apartment. This is something I have struggled with for years. And I love a clean home. I love the way it feels when there's no chaos in my home because it helps with the chaos in my mind. And it makes me feel proud when it's clean. But almost every time I clean it successfully, there is this voice in the back of my head, this voice that's screaming, well, it'll be a complete disaster zone by tomorrow anyway. Or, good job, girl, you did something that most people know how to do by the time they're 10 and you can do it at 30. Good for you. It took me years to realize that that voice in the back of my head was not in the back of my head. He was in the front of my head, screaming and yelling at me and stopping me from actually congratulating myself and giving myself flowers for the things that I overcome silently, the battle, the mountain that I climb in order to get that task done and to maintain order and cleanliness in my home. So I started to ask myself, what is it about cleaning my home that makes me so anxious, that makes me so avoidant, that makes it so hard? Because the truth is that every time I do clean my home, and we all know as ADHDers, we get into this hyper-focused zone. Maybe we haven't cleaned for weeks or months, and then we get in the zone and all of a sudden we are Olympic level gold medal cleaners, right? So when I get down to the task I've been avoiding, washing the dishes, taking out the trash, making the bed, putting the clothes away, the ever-present mountain of clothes that's been sitting there piling up higher and higher and higher as my shame piles up higher and higher and higher and higher. I started to ask myself, what is it that's causing you to avoid this task so much? Because when you do get down to the task, it really doesn't take that much time. It's actually kind of easy, the task in and of itself. It's usually that task we've been avoiding for weeks or for months when we get down to it and it takes an hour or less. And it's like, what was I doing? Why was I so anxious to do that thing that in the end actually was easy? But that's the thing about ADHD. It's not necessarily the task that's so difficult. It's the mental chaos, what we call the mental load, the mountain of shame that we're battling against to even get to a state of mind and a state of being and a state of clarity where we can do the seemingly simple task of cleaning the house. So I decided to give myself an exercise, and I recommend that all of you try this as well because it has worked wonders in my life. And it's very simple. I decided to become more aware of the voices in my head. I decided that every time one of those devilish voices came up to tell me that I'm disgusting, or I'm lazy, or I'm not like my friends, or I can never have people over to the house, or how can I ever have a boyfriend or a partner or a husband or a child? I can barely clean up after myself. You name it. The list of self-criticisms and shame and hatred is a mile long. But I decided that I was going to start taking inventory and pausing in those moments of shame and really noticing what kinds of mean and terrible and horrible things I was saying to myself. Now, you might think that's crazy of you. Why would you want to see or hear a list of mean and horrible things that you say to yourself? I'll tell you why. Because the ADHD brain moves so quickly through our thoughts that we don't even realize how many of them, the sheer volume of shameful, negative, self-critical thoughts we're having in a given moment attached to an action. So when I paused and I started to write them down and I started to take notes of them and really realize how pervasive they were, how prevalent they were, then I could start to attack them one by one and ask myself, how true are these? And what can I do about the fact that I think these things about myself? Because what I started to realize was that I wasn't avoiding the task. I was avoiding the feeling associated with the task. I was procrastinating, feeling like crap about myself. Because when I spend time in the mess that I've created in my apartment, or I've let food rot in the fridge, when I go and open that fridge, yeah, some rotting food is gross, but what's even grosser is the thoughts that I'm having. How could you let it get this way? You're disgusting. Who will ever marry you? If somebody else saw this, you're not a real adult. How come you can't manage the food in your fridge? Why would anybody want to feel that way? So of course, I don't open the fridge. Because if I open the fridge, I'm not just opening the fridge, I'm opening myself up to a barrage of shame. Deep, deep shame that hurts. It hurts to feel it. It hurts to hear it from the voices in my head, which aren't even just voices in my head, they're also a reflection of all of the voices that I heard when I was growing up that told me those things, that made me feel that way. Like I was undisciplined or abnormal or lazy or wrong or filthy, you name it. I've internalized those criticisms. I've internalized the struggles that I have as an ADHDer with some sort of moral failing. So the first step was, I've got to become aware of the ways that I talk to myself and the ways I make myself feel when it comes to doing tasks that are challenging for me. And ask myself, is it the task that's challenging for me? Or is it feeling those ways about myself and living in this center of shame? Okay, now I've realized it's the feeling, not the task. So what can I do about it? It took me a little while to get to this next step, but it's super important. The next step was that I asked myself, how would it feel if somebody that I love and care about and who's supposed to love and care about me was saying the things to me that I say to myself? Now, I couldn't do this exercise without knowing what I really am saying to myself, what I really am thinking at 1,000 words per minute. So once I slowed down, I said, okay, here's this list of things you say to yourself every time you face the task and you face the thing you've been avoiding. Now, what if it was a husband or a boyfriend who was standing over my shoulder right now and saying those things to me? This deep internal voice of shame and self-criticism that I have, what if it wasn't an internal voice? What if it was an external voice? Someone who's supposed to love and care about me. Because guess what? I'm supposed to love and care about me. So if it was, let's say, a boyfriend, who, as I went to open the fridge and clean it out, a task I'd been avoiding for weeks, and some food has gone bad, and the fridge is kind of dirty, and it smells. And I go and I take that action to go and clean it up because, the longer I wait, the more the food is gonna get smelly, the more the food is gonna rot, the grosser it's gonna get. So I should be happy that I've taken an action, even if it feels like it's too late. So I've got my scrubbers and my soaps and I'm on my knees, and I picture my boyfriend standing behind me, over my shoulder, saying all of the things that I usually say to myself while I'm doing this task. Oh my God, you're disgusting. How could you let it get this way? You're filthy. I'll never marry you. No one will ever marry you. Why would anyone want to live with you? What a mess, blah, 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 blah. Now, if this was a boyfriend who said this to me over my shoulder while I was on my knees cleaning and scrubbing the fridge and getting it right, I would tell that man to kick rocks. That's abusive. If a friend of mine told me that her partner was speaking to her that way while she was cleaning the fridge, I would tell her, you gotta tell him to kick rocks. That man is abusive. So why is it okay when I talk to myself that way? But it's not okay if a partner, boyfriend, husband, would talk to me that way. I would stand up to the boyfriend who talked to me that way and say, hey, you can't talk to me that way. I'm cleaning the fridge right now. You should appreciate this. You want to get down on your knees and clean it with me? But if it's myself, because it's a quiet, silent, internal voice, I'm scrubbing and I'm cleaning and I'm allowing myself to talk to myself that way. And I'm supposed to love myself the most. I'm being abusive to myself. And again, if we're being abused, typically we want to avoid a situation where we're being abused. We want to be in situations where we feel good. So facing the thing we've been avoiding and facing our emotions that we've been avoiding and our shame doesn't feel good. So we continue to avoid it even more and feed the cycle. So there are plenty of experts out there on ADHD who can give you practical solutions for how to build a routine around cleaning your home or cleaning your fridge or any other executive function that you're struggling with. But for me, before I could even get to a place where I have a strong habit or routine or ritual that works for me when it comes to those routines and those executive functions, I had to address the underlying thing that was really causing me to avoid those tasks, like the plague. And that was the shame. The deep sense of inadequacy that comes from years of feeling like you're not normal, like you're disordered or dysregulated. And it's true, you're not normal, and you are disordered, and you are dysregulated. We don't get to choose those words. However, we do get to choose how we feel about ourselves and how we talk to ourselves in those moments. And the only way to address how we talk to ourselves and the true impact that shame has on us as people, in order to get to a place where we can thrive and we can challenge ourselves and we can do things differently than we've done them in the past, is to first understand the weight of the shame and how we feel about ourselves, and to then start to address how we feel about ourselves and how we talk to ourselves, and change and turn those thoughts around and silence them like you would silence an abusive partner who was telling you that you're filthy and disgusting and you're abnormal and no one would ever want to marry you and blah, 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 blah. Externalize the internal critic. Put a face to the internal critic. Make them someone who's supposed to love you because you are supposed to love you, and you will feel a world of difference. They call that becoming neutral. It's very, very challenging to become neutral with something that carries such emotional weight for us. But without really, truly understanding and attacking the emotional weight that it carries, we can never become neutral. I'm excited to tell you guys that using this strategy, I have been able to dissociate the act of cleaning my home from the feelings of shame that I had around why my home was unclean. If my home is unclean, I look around and I go, oh, you've been really busy this week, time to clean it up. But that took years of understanding that that voice of inner criticism is only paralyzing me further from getting that task done. It's only causing me to avoid it. So my challenge for you today is to ask yourself around the tasks that you are avoiding the most. Are you avoiding them because the task is difficult, or are you avoiding them because the emotions that you feel around doing that task make doing that task more difficult? If the answer is the latter, next time you have to go and do that task, I invite you to really explore what emotions are coming up for you, what criticisms are coming up for you. And pause in those moments. Do whatever you need to do. Write them down, voice record them, and ask yourself, is this an acceptable way to talk to myself? Would I let somebody who's supposed to love me talk to me the way I'm talking to myself right now? And if the answer is no, then ask yourself, is it possible to tell that inner voice, that abusive inner critic, to kick rocks because you got a fridge to clean? Believe me, it takes time, it takes practice, but it is worth it. Because now, cleaning the house is just cleaning the house. When the house is unclean, it's a little overwhelming, but it's just an unclean house. And an unclean house can get easily cleaned because I don't have a disruptive thought coming up every single time I pick up a piece of clothing off the floor, or every time I open the fridge, or when I look at the pile of dishes in the sink. I've managed the disruptive thought that said it meant I'm a failure. It was some type of wrongdoing. I haven't harmed anyone. It's a pile of dishes. All I gotta do is one by one scrub them, and in 20 minutes, it'll be over. When it takes an hour and a half to do the dishes, it's because every 3 minutes there was a disruptive negative thought that I didn't want to spend time with, so I walked away and did something else that makes me feel a little bit better. ADHDers aren't procrastinators of tasks, we're procrastinators of feelings first. And it is perfectly normal to not want to feel like you suck, like you're a failure. So today, my ADHD friends and family, my ADHDers, I challenge you. What emotions are coming up with regard to that task that you're avoiding? And how can you talk to yourself a little differently, or silence that voice, or address him the way you would address a loved one who is speaking to you that way? So the first step is we're gonna notice what are the feelings that we are associating with the task that we're avoiding. The second thing we're going to do is think about how it would feel If those negative feelings and thoughts that we're having about ourselves and our ability to do that task or not do that task were being said to us by someone who's supposed to love us, we're going to ask ourselves if we would accept that same criticism, that same shame, that same negative emotion from someone who's supposed to love us. And if the answer is that we wouldn't, we're going to ask ourselves why we allow ourselves to talk to ourselves that way. And all of this is with the goal of ultimately neutralizing that task to just be a task, to not be a silent, heavy, emotional burden or emotional load attached to the task. To separate ourselves, to separate the task that we need to do from who we are and from our sense of deserving. It's not a moral failing that you have a pile of dishes in the sink. They just need to be done. And what's stopping you from doing them, more than just your neurobiological ADHD brain, is the rapid, quick-fire succession of negative thoughts and criticisms that you're having about yourself because the dishes piled up. If you can deal with that, you can do anything.